Welcome, dear listeners, to Stories Mystics, your gateway to enchanting tales of mystery, suspense, and the uncanny. Whether you're unraveling classic Whodunits or exploring shadowy secrets, we're thrilled you've joined us for another gripping adventure. If you love these stories, hit that subscribe button to never miss an episode. Your support keeps the mysteries alive. Today's story is The Killer in the Pew, Miss Marple's sinister sermon. Envision a serene Sunday sermon in a quaint English village church where hymns soar and sunlight dances through stained glass. But when a wealthy lord gasps and collapses in his pew, poisoned by a sacred wafer, Miss Jane Marple's keen eyes spot the sinister undercurrents among the faithful. Whispers of grudges, hidden alliances, and deadly herbs unravel a web of betrayal. Can she expose the killer before the bells toll again? Dive into The Killer in the Pew. The truth awaits. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Sunday Chime. The bells of St. Mary Mead's Church pealed across the village like a clarion call to the faithful, their resonant tones weaving through the crisp autumn air, stirring leaves from their perches on ancient oaks. Sunlight streamed through the canopy in golden shafts, dappling the cobbled path that led to the weathered stone facade of St. Mary's, where ivy clung like possessive lovers to the arches and spire. Miss Jane Marple, clad in her sensible tweed skirt and a cardigan the colour of faded lavender, made her way along the lane, her basket swinging gently with the rhythm of her steps. The village was alive with the quiet bustle of Sunday morning. Children in starched collars scampering ahead of parents, the baker's wife nodding greetings, and the distant bark of a foxhound echoing from the meadows. Inside the church, the atmosphere was a balm of serenity, the air scented with beeswax from polished pews and the faint floral whisper of lilies arranged at the altar. Stained glass windows depicted saints in vibrant hues, crimson robes, sapphire skies, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the flagstone floor. Miss Marple slipped into her customary seat, third pew from the front on the right, where the wood bore the faint indentations of generations. She unfolded her knitting, her intricate shawl in soft wool, and let her needles click in harmonious counterpoint to the organ's prelude, a melody that swelled like a gentle tide. The congregation filtered in, a microcosm of village life. The postmistress with her perpetual air of knowing secrets, the doctor adjusting his spectacles, and Lord Harrington himself, the wealthy landowner whose estate sprawled beyond the village bounds. He lumbered to his family pew at the front, his broad shoulders straining against a tailored suit, his face ruddy from years of outdoor pursuits and fine port. Beside him sat his veiled widow, his wife, Lady Harrington, her face obscured by a netted hat, her gloved hands folded primly. Rumours swirled about their union, a marriage of convenience, whispers of discord behind the manor's gilded doors. The vicar, Reverend Clements, ascended the pulpit, his robes billowing like sails in a breeze, his voice a soothing baritone as he intoned the opening hymn. Let us sing of forgiveness, dear flock, for in mercy we find our truest strength. The voices rose in unison, a chorus that filled the nave with harmonious devotion. Miss Marple joined in, her soprano clear and steady, but her eyes, sharp as polished agates, darted about, noting the subtle dissonances. The church warden's furtive glance toward the altar, the disinherited nephew, young Tobias Harrington, clenching his hymn book until his knuckles whitened, and the organist, Miss Eliza Thorne, whose fingers danced on the keys with a fervour that bordered on frenzy. As the sermon commenced, Reverend Clements leaned forward, his words painting vivid portraits of redemption. Consider the prodigal son returning to open arms, or the woman at the well, her sins washed away in living water. Forgiveness is not weakness, but the forge that tempers the soul. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch. She had always found sermons a fertile ground for observation, where masks slipped and true natures peeked through. Lord Harrington shifted uncomfortably, his cough a dry rasp that echoed oddly in the hush. Then, as the vicar extolled the virtues of absolution, a strangled gasp shattered the tranquility. Lord Harrington lurched forward, his hand clutching at his throat, face purpling like overripe plums. His body convulsed once, twice, then slumped against the pew, eyes bulging in silent accusation. Gasps rippled through the congregation like a stone skimmed across a pond, women fanning themselves, men half rising in alarm. Lady Harrington let out a theatrical wail, her veil fluttering as she leaned over him. "Henry! Oh, merciful heavens!" Reverend Clements faltered, his sermon dissolving into chaos. "Doctor! Is there a doctor?" The village physician rushed forward, kneeling to check for a pulse, his face grim. "He's gone. Looks like poison. The wafer. He took communion just before." Miss Marple remained seated, her composure a still point in the storm, but her mind raced like a thoroughbred at full gallop. Communion wafers, distributed moments ago, plain, innocuous discs meant for spiritual sustenance, yet Harrington's had been tainted, a deadly sacrament. She recalled the verger's tray passing down the rows, hands dipping in with reverent care. Who had access? The vicar, preparing the elements in the vestry, the church warden, overseeing the rite, perhaps even the organist, with her vantage from the loft. As the congregation milled in hushed horror, Miss Marple's gaze settled on a hymn book left open on the pew beside Harrington's body. A note protruded slightly, scripted in elegant cursive. The silver chalice vanishes at dusk. Cryptic, yet pointed. The church's antique chalice, a relic from Tudor times, had been reported missing last week. A petty theft amid the village's minor dramas. She slipped the note into her basket under pretense of adjusting her knitting, her fingers brushing the wool as if seeking comfort. The doctor summoned the constable, a sturdy fellow named Craddock, who arrived breathless, his uniform askew. "Everyone stay put. This is a crime scene." Murmurs swelled. Poison. In church. Who would dare? Miss Marple rose quietly, approaching Craddock with her unassuming air. "Constable, might I suggest examining the communion remnants, and perhaps the verger's log? Irregularities there could illuminate." Craddock nodded gruffly, but his eyes held respect. Miss Marple's reputation for untangling knots preceded her. As the body was discreetly covered, the congregation dispersed in clusters, whispers buzzing like bees in a hive. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes tracing the stained glass, St. Peter denying the crowing cock, a tableau of betrayal that mirrored the morning's events. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, burning off the mist that cloaked the churchyard. Miss Marple strolled among the graves, her basket a companionable weight, ostensibly to lay a sprig of rosemary on an old friend's marker. But her path led her near the grave-digger, old Mr. Simmons, leaning on his spade with the weariness of one who conversed daily with the departed. "Dreadful business, miss," he grunted, wiping his brow. "Lord Harrington, struck down in the house of God." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied mildly. "You tend these grounds faithfully. Seen any unusual visitors of late? Nocturnal ones, perhaps?" Simmons scratched his chin, his eyes squinting against the light. "I, miss, shadows flitting round the crypt last moon. Thought it foxes, but heard voices, arguing low like. One sounded like young Tobias, the other feminine, veiled." Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away like a pressed flower in a book. Tobias, the disinherited nephew, cut from the will after a scandalous elopement attempt, and a feminine voice, Lady Harrington. Or Miss Thorne, the organist, whose melodies masked a turbulent past. Her inquiries led her to the vicarage, a cosy cottage abutting the church, where Reverend Clements welcomed her with flustered hospitality. "Miss Marple, such a tragedy. Tea, to steady the nerves." Over steaming cups, the vicar fidgeted, his collar seeming suddenly tight. "The wafers, I prepared them myself. Harmless flour and water. How could this happen?" Miss Marple sipped delicately. "Evil finds cracks, Reverend. That note in the hymn book about the chalice. You reported it stolen." Clemens paled. "Yes, a week ago. Priceless artifact, but surely unrelated." "Perhaps," she mused, "yet theft breeds resentment. Who had keys to the sacristy?" "The churchwarden, Mr. Greaves. And, well, I suppose others could have borrowed." Their conversation meandered to parish gossip. Greaves's financial woes, Tobias's debts, Miss Thorne's unrequited affections for the late lord. As Miss Marple departed, the notes puzzle resolved in a flash. The chalice's theft traced to Greaves, pawning it for quick cash. A petty crime confessed tearfully when confronted later the afternoon at his cottage. "I meant to replace it," he blubbered, returning the relic. The parish sighed in relief, tensions eased by this minor resolution. Yet as evening fell, Miss Marple sat by her fireside, knitting resumed, her mind unquiet. The poison's trace on a pew Bible, faint but unmistakable, a residue of hemlock, common in the church garden. Who planted it there? And why target Harrington amid sacred rites? The Sunday chime had rung in death, but its echoes promised deeper revelations, drawing her inexorably into the shadows. The village slumbered under a blanket of stars, but Miss Marple's lamp burned late, her thoughts a labyrinth of motives and means. Tomorrow, the graves would whisper more. Chapter 2. Whispers among the graves. The afternoon sun dipped lazily toward the horizon, stretching shadows across St. Mary Mead's churchyard, like fingers reaching from the underworld, grasping at the weathered tombstones that tilted at odd angles, as if the earth itself were reluctant to hold its secrets. Miss Jane Marple meandered along the gravel paths, her sensible shoes crunching softly against the pebbles, a bouquet of wild asters clutched in one hand, plucked from her garden under the guise of paying respects to the departed. The air was thick with the loamy scent of turned soil and fading blooms, a poignant reminder that life and death danced in eternal tandem. Birds flitted among the yew trees, their songs a cheerful counterpoint to the somber stones, etched with names long faded by rain and time. She paused at a lichen-covered marker, ostensibly to arrange her flowers, but her keen eyes scanned the surroundings. The churchyard was a repository not just of bones, but of village lore, feuds etched in epitaphs, alliances forged in shared grief. Lord Harrington's fresh plot lay ahead, the soil still mounded and raw, a stark intrusion amid the settled graves. Villagers whispered that his interment had been hasty, the poison's taint demanding discretion lest scandal taint the hallowed ground. A rhythmic thud drew her attention. The gravedigger, old Josiah Trent, wielding his spade with the methodical grace of one intimate with eternity. His back was bent like a question mark, his overalls caked in earth that spoke of endless toil. Miss Marple approached with her unhurried gait, her basket swinging like a pendulum. "Good afternoon, Mr. Trent. A fine day for tending the silent ones, wouldn't you say?" Trent straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with a grimy sleeve, his eyes squinting against the light. "Miss Marple?" "Aye, fine enough, though the ground's heavy with last night's dew, dreadful bout his lordship, struck down mid-prayer. Unnatural, that." She nodded sympathetically, her fingers tracing the inscription on a nearby stone. "Beloved wife and mother, taken too soon." "Unnatural indeed. You've seen many come and go here. Any unusual activity of late? The churchyard holds more than memories after dark, or so they say." Trent leaned on his spade, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur as if the dead might overhear. "Funny you ask, miss. Nocturnal wanderers, yes. 2 nights back, shapes slinking around the Harrington vault. One tall, lanky, reminded me of young Tobias, his lordship's nephew. The other, stocky like Mr. Greaves, the church warden. Argued fierce they did, something about a disputed claim and papers that burn. Thought it foxes at first, but voices carry on the wind." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, though her expression remained serene. Tobias Harrington, disinherited after a scandal involving racecourse debts, his gambling a village open secret. And Greaves, the church warden, with his penchant for hoarding relics from estate sales. How intriguing. And the vault, anything amiss there? Trent shrugged. "Locked tight, but I noticed scrapes on the iron gate, fresh-like, and a locket dropped nearby, gold, with a curl of hair inside. Left it in the vicar's study, thinking it sentimental." Thanking him, Miss Marple continued her stroll, her mind weaving threads. Nocturnal meetings, disputed claims, likely tied to Harrington's will, rumoured to favour distant charities over kin. She veered toward the vicarage, but detoured to the church garden, a verdant enclave bordered by hedgerows buzzing with late bees. Herbs flourished here, rosemary for remembrance, sage for wisdom, and hemlock, its lacy leaves deceptive in their innocence, a plant of potent peril if misused. She knelt, ostensibly to admire a cluster of thyme, but her gloved fingers brushed the hemlock stems. A faint residue clung, powdery, acrid, not natural dew, but traces of extraction, perhaps for a deadly brew. Who tended these beds? The old herbalist, Mrs. Lydia Croft, whose cottage bordered the yard, known for poultices and potions, and a grudge against Harrington for evicting her kin from estate lands years ago. Pocketing a leaf discreetly, Miss Marple proceeded to the vicar's study, a cosy annex off the vestry, lined with theological tomes and cluttered with parish ledgers. Reverend Clements was absent, but the door stood ajar, careless in the day's upheaval. She slipped inside, her eyes alighting on the misplaced locket on the desk, its chain tangled like a noose. Opening it revealed not just a curl of auburn hair, but a miniature portrait, a young woman resembling Lady Harrington in her youth, inscribed "To my beloved E, 1895. A clue or misdirection. Rifling gently through a drawer, she uncovered faded gravestone rubbings, inscriptions from the Harrington family plot. One stood out: Eleanor Harrington, infant daughter, 1896, 1896. But the dates mismatched parish records she'd glimpsed once, forged, perhaps, to alter inheritance lines. Baptism, records, if tampered, could legitimize or disqualify heirs. Her suspicions crystallized, a scheme of altered documents resolving a feud over legitimacy, confronting Greaves later at his modest home. A thatched affair brimming with pilfered antiques. Miss Marple presented the rubbings. Mr. Greaves, these forgeries. Your hand. To claim a share as a distant relation. Greaves crumpled, his collector's facade shattering. Yes, miss. Harrington's will cut me out. Me, his half-cousin through Eleanor, the child he denied, forged the baptism to prove lineage. Tobias helped for a cut, but no harm meant, just justice. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. Justice twisted breeds poison. Confess to the vicar, restore the records. The family feud ends here. Greaves agreed, tears streaming, the weight lifted. Tobias, summoned, admitted his role, vowing reform, his gambling debts forgiven in exchange for honesty. The bereaved Harrington kin, informed discreetly, found closure in the truth. No illegitimate claims, the estate intact. A long-standing rift mended, whispers of resentment silenced. Yet as Miss Marple retired to her cottage, the hemlock leaf in her pocket prickled like a thorn. Traces in the garden linked to Mrs. Croft's grudge, eviction bitterness festering into murder, and Tobias's nocturnal argument more than forgery. Her instincts urged vigilance. She resolved to shadow Croft's evening wanderings, suspecting a rendezvous that might unveil the killer's hand. The moon rose silvering the village, but Miss Marple's lamp flickered on, her knitting a veil for contemplation. The graves had whispered volumes, but their deepest secrets awaited the night's embrace. Chapter 3. The shadowed vestry twilight descended upon St. Mary Mead like a velvet curtain drawn by invisible hands, the sky a canvas streaked with bruised purples and lingering golds, as if the day clung stubbornly to its final breaths. The church of St. Mary's stood sentinel amid the hush, its spire piercing the fading light, while the village below settled into the rhythmic cadence of evening, chimneys puffing lazy smoke, lamps flickering to life in cottage windows, and the distant lowing of cattle returning from pastures. Miss Jane Marple paused at the lych gate, her silhouette a modest outline against the gloaming, her basket now lightened of its daytime burdens, but heavy with the weight of unspoken queries. The hemlock leaf from the garden rustled faintly in her pocket, a verdant accusation against the encroaching dark. She had spent the afternoon in quiet reflection, her cottage fireside a haven where tea steamed and her knitting needles flew like diligent sentinels. The forgeries resolved, a balm to the Harrington kin's festering wounds, yet the poisoned spectre loomed larger, its tendrils snaking toward motives buried in the village's layered past. Mrs. Lydia Croft, the herbalist with her eviction grudge, the organist, Eliza Thorne, whose melodies masked a turbulent history of spurned affections. Miss Marple's instincts, honed like a blade on the whetstone of human nature, urged her toward the vestry during evensong preparations, a time when the church hummed with solitary activity, vulnerabilities exposed like nerves in twilight's forgiving dimness. Slipping through the side door, she moved with the grace of one accustomed to unobtrusive observation, her footsteps muffled by the worn Persian runner that lined the corridor. The vestry door stood ajar, a sliver of amber light spilling out like an invitation or a trap. Incense curled in lazy spirals from a brass censer, its spicy veil mingling with the musty aroma of aged linen and beeswax. Shelves groaned under stacks of vestments, cassocks in somber black, surplices pristine as fresh snow, and flickering candle stubs cast elongated shadows that danced across the walls like spectral confessors. Reverend Ambrose Hargrove, no, Reverend Clement Hargrove, his name aslip in her mind's catalogue, bent over the communion ledger, his quill scratching entries with hurried strokes. His collar seemed tighter than usual, beads of perspiration glistening on his brow despite the evening chill. Miss Marple cleared her throat softly, a sound like rustling leaves. "Reverend Hargrove, I hope I'm not intruding. Just a quick word about the parish flower rota. Though, truth be told, it's the communion logs that pique my curiosity." The vicar startled, ink splattering like blood across the page. "Miss Marple, you move like a ghost. The logs, whatever for. Dreadful business with Lord Harrington. Poison, they say, but the wafers were prepared under my watchful eye." She settled into a rickety chair by the desk, her eyes gentle but probing like sunlight piercing fog. Watchful, yes, yet inconsistencies whisper. The ledger shows 20 wafers prepared, but only 18 distributed. A minor discrepancy, perhaps, but in light of tragedy. Hargrove's hands trembled, the quill clattering to the desk, his face, usually a mask of benevolent calm, cracked like parched earth. You've noticed. Oh, Miss Marple, it's a burden I've carried alone. The funds, the collection plate has been light, you see. Small sums diverted to aid a dear soul in need." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice a soothing balm. "A dear soul. Unburden yourself, Reverend. Secrets fester like untended wounds." Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over like overflow from a rain barrel. "Evelyn, my hidden companion in the next village, a widow, fallen on hard times. Our affection bloomed in secrecy, lest scandal taint the cloth. I siphoned tithes to ease her plight, nothing grand, but enough to draw Mr. Greaves's suspicion. He covered for me, bless him, adjusting the logs to mask the shortfall. As if summoned by the name, the church warden, Elias Greaves, entered from the adjoining sacristy, his arms laden with polished chalices. His face, creased like old leather, paled at the sight. "Reverend, Miss Marple, what's this?" Hargrove gestured weakly. "She's uncovered it, Elias. The embezzlement, our little ruse." Greaves set down his burden with a clank, his shoulders sagging. "Not ruse, but mercy. The Reverend's heart is pure. Evelyn's children would starve without aid. I fudged the numbers, wafers, collections, to keep the books balanced, no harm to the parish." Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind catalogued, funds funneled, logs altered, a subplot of compassion twisted by deception. "Gentlemen, the truth liberates. Confess to the parish council. Restitution can mend. Perhaps a fund for widows, turn folly to philanthropy." The exchange grew tense, voices layering like storm clouds. Hargrove's pleas for understanding, Greaves's defensive barbs about village hypocrisy. Yet Miss Marple's calm intercessions wove a path to resolution, a tearful vow from Hargrove to reveal all at the next vestry meeting, Greaves pledging to repay from his savings. The parish's financial woes, a gnawing undercurrent, found balm in this redemptive honesty, the men's burdens lightened like sails catching wind. As they sealed their pact with clasped hands, Miss Marple's eye caught a glint beneath a folded vestment, a concealed vial, its label peeling but legible. Conium maculatum extract, hemlock concentrate. The poison's chemical signature, matching the wafer's taint. Her pulse quickened. Who hid it here? Not Hargrove, his shock genuine as she revealed it. "This vial, yours?" Greaves blanched. "No, I swear. Perhaps Miss Thorne. She's been in here often practicing late. Her feud with Harrington over that forgotten concert scandal where he accused her of theft ruined her reputation. The organist, Eliza Thorne. Her fervent playing during the sermon, fingers like vengeful talons on the keys, a motive tied to a scandal. Harrington's public denouncement years ago, claiming she pilfered funds from a charity recital. Her career stalled in the village's stifling judgment. Hemlock in the vestry, convenient for one with access, brewing vengeance in solitude. Thanking them, Miss Marple departed as evensong bells tolled, their peals a sombre prelude. The vestry's shadows had yielded truths, the embezzlement mended in a moment of grace, yet the vial pointed to Thorn's vendetta, heightening the web's intricacy. Under cover of dusk, she ascended the bell tower's spiral stairs, her lantern a beacon in the gloom, poised for a nocturnal vigil. What whispers would the heights reveal? The tower's vantage offered the village sprawled like a patchwork quilt, lights twinkling in defiance of the dark. Miss Marple settled on a dusty bench amid the ropes and mechanisms, her knitting a silent companion. Hours ticked by, the cold seeping like doubt, but patience was her ally. Then, a flicker below, a figure slipping into the churchyard, cloaked and furtive. Eliza Thorne, her organist's cape billowing. She vanished into the side door, emerging moments later with a satchel, heading toward the herbalist's cottage. Miss Marple descended swiftly, shadowing from afar, her heart a drumbeat in the quiet. Thorne knocked at Croft's door, admitted with hushed urgency. Through a cracked shutter, Miss Marple glimpsed their exchange, heated words, a past vial similar to the vestry's find. "The deed's done," Thorne hissed, his arrogance silenced. Croft's cackle chilled the air, "and my eviction avenged. But the nephew, Tobias, he suspects." The intrigue deepened, an alliance of grudges, hemlock their weapon. Miss Marple retreated, her vigil rewarded. The shadowed vestry had peeled a layer, but the tower's whispers pulsed with peril, urging her toward midnight's deeper revelations. Chapter 4. Bells of Deception. Midnight cloaked St. Mary Mead in an inky veil, the village a slumbering beast under a canopy of stars that twinkled like distant eyes, watchful and indifferent. The church tower rose defiant against the night, its stone facade etched with the patina of centuries. The bell chamber a lofty eyrie where echoes of tolls lingered like ghosts of lamentations past. Miss Jane Marple ascended the spiral staircase with deliberate caution, her lantern's beam slicing through the gloom like a blade through fog, illuminating dust motes that swirled in eddies around her. The steps, worn smooth by countless feet, creaked faintly under her weight, a symphony of antiquity that harmonized with the distant hoot of an owl patrolling the hedgerows. Her breath came in measured puffs, not from exertion, but from the electric anticipation thrumming in her veins. The vial from the vestry, its hemlock essence a silent scream of intent, had propelled her here. Eliza Thorne's furtive alliance with Tobias Harrington, glimpsed through Croft's shutter, hinted at a conspiracy brewed in bitterness. Thorne's ruined reputation from the Lord's accusations, Tobias's disinheritance a festering wound. But Mrs. Croft's cackle, "The deed's done," suggested layers yet unpeeled, a vendetta that transcended personal slight. Reaching the bell chamber, Miss Marple extinguished her lantern, plunging into shadow. The space was a cavern of mechanisms, massive bronze bells suspended like dormant titans, ropes dangling like nooses, pendulums swinging in hypnotic arcs that marked time's inexorable march. Moonlight filtered through narrow lancet windows, casting lattice patterns on the floorboards, where pigeon droppings speckled like abstract art. She positioned herself behind a stout beam, her knitting bag a makeshift seat, and waited, her senses attuned to the night's subtle orchestra, the rustle of bats in the rafters, the faint drip of condensation from the roof. Time stretched, elastic and teasing, but patience was her forte, a virtue honed in countless vigils. Then a distant clang, the side door unlatching, footsteps ascending the stairs in hurried tandem. Voices floated up, fragmented at first, then clarifying like a radio tuning in. "Ah, foolproof," you said. Tobias's tenor laced with panic, but Craddock's sniffing around the wafer traced to hemlock if they link it to your organ loft stash. Eliza's response sharp as a reed pipe. "My stash." You supplied the extract, Tobias, from Croft's apothecary. Switched for the rival's dose, remember? Harrington was to sip the tainted wine at the manor feast, not choke in church. Your bungled swap turned sacrament to slaughter. They emerged into the chamber, moonlight haloing their forms, Tobias lanky and disheveled, his coat askew, Eliza, her cape swirling like a raven's wings, face pale but resolute. Tobias paced, his boots thudding against the planks. The plan was flawless. Poison the old tyrant, claim the estate as rightful heir once the forgery surfaced. But Greaves confessed, the will's intact, we're exposed. Eliza snatched a satchel from her shoulder, rummaging within. Not if we silence the loose ends. Croft's grudge, her eviction, makes her the perfect scapegoat. Plant this vial in her cottage. Her herbal knowledge seals the noose. The vial, identical to the vestry's find, gleamed in her hand, its contents sloshing ominously. Miss Marple's heart quickened, the plot unveiled, a trio's packed, poisons switched in miscalculation, Harrington's death a botched bid for fortune and revenge. But the organist's words hinted at a rival who, not just vengeance, but elimination of obstacles. She stepped from concealment, her voice a calm anchor in the storm. "A clever scheme, Miss Thorne, Mr. Harrington, but the bells toll for deception, not triumph." They whirled, Tobias fumbling for a pocket, a glint of metal, a small derringer. Eliza's eyes widened, the vial slipping slightly in her grasp. "Miss Marple, how?" "The tower whispers to those who listen," she replied mildly, her gaze steady. "Your alliance, forged in shared resentment. Eliza, scorned by Harrington's theft accusations at the recital. Your talent, shackled to this loft. Tobias, stripped of inheritance for debts he claimed unjust. And Croft, evicted from ancestral lands. Her hemlock, the weapon you wielded." Tobias leveled the pistol, his hand unsteady. "Stay back, old woman. This doesn't concern you." Miss Marple stood unmoved, her presence a quiet force. "Oh, but it does. The switch poisons, meant for a manor rival, perhaps the solicitor contesting the will. But fate intervened, the wafer tainted instead. Your standoff here amid swinging pendulums mirrors the precarious balance of your plot." Eliza's facade cracked, her voice trembling like a discordant note. "He deserved it, ruined my life with lies, called me thief when it was his embezzlement from the charity. I only wanted justice, tamper the wine, watch him fall." Tobias promised the estate share. Croft brewed the extract for her revenge. Tobias snarled, "Quiet, she's bluffing." But Eliza crumpled, the vial clattering to the floor, rolling toward a pendulum's arc. No more lies. The plan unraveled when I mixed the wafers, confused the batches in haste, his gasp. Haunting. The confession poured forth, a cathartic torrent. Their midnight meetings in the crypt, Croft's distillation in her cottage cauldron, Tobias's forgery to bolster his claim. Shared resentment bound them, but Harrington's church death, a public spectacle, shattered their veil. Tobias lowered the pistol, defeat etching his features. "It's over. I'll turn myself in, face the gallows if need be." Eliza nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "And I, atonement through truth, no more shadows." In that gripping moment, amid the bell's silent vigil, their alliance dissolved. vows of surrender echoing like peals. Miss Marple guided them down, the constable summoned by a prearranged signal, a lantern flash from the tower. Craddock arrived, irons ready, but their voluntary admissions softened the arrest. A poignant end to vendettas, the trio's burdens lifted in confession's light. Yet as they descended, a scrap fluttered from Eliza's cape, a dropped sermon note, scripted in Harrington's bold hand. Confront the veiled betrayer at dawn, estate secrets in the crypt. Miss Marple pocketed it, her mind alight. Not Thorn or Tobias the mastermind, but another, Lady Harrington. The widow's veil, a metaphor for concealed motives. The night waned, stars paling, but Miss Marple's resolve burned brighter. The bells of deception had rung their discord, resolving the conspirators' arc, but the note unveiled a final betrayal, propelling her to summon all for dawn's unmasking. The churchyard stirred with first light, graves whispering approval as she prepared for reckoning. Chapter 5. Dawn's absolution. The first blush of dawn crept over St. Mary Mead like a tentative promise, the sky unfurling in layers of rose and amber as if the heavens themselves were peeling back the night's deceptions to reveal the unvarnished truth. Mist clung to the meadows, swirling in ethereal eddies that softened the village's outlines, the thatched roofs, the winding lanes, the church spire rising like a steadfast guardian against the awakening light. Miss Jane Marple stood at the lich gate, her breath visible in the crisp air, her cardigan pulled tight against the chill that nipped like unspoken regrets. The sermon note from the bell tower rustled in her pocket, Harrington's script a final testament. Confront the veiled betrayer at dawn, estate secrets in the crypt. It pointed not to Thorn or Tobias, but to a closer shadow, Lady Harrington, the widow whose veil masked more than grief. She had dispatched notes at first light, slips of paper carried by the baker's boy to summon the key players to the nave. Lady Harrington, her composure a fragile facade. Eliza Thorn, the organist, her fingers still trembling from confession. Tobias, the nephew, his defiance wilted. Mrs. Croft, the herbalist, her cauldron of grudges simmering low, and Constable Craddock, his uniform starched for the occasion. The parish stirred faintly, milk churns clinking, roosters crowing, but the church remained a sanctum of silence, its doors creaking open to admit the assembly. The nave bathed in the dawn's nascent glow, sunlight filtering through stained glass in jeweled cascades that painted the pews in hues of sapphire and crimson like blood spilled in divine judgment. The air was cool and still, scented with lingering incense and the faint, earthy tang of stone. Miss Marple positioned herself at the chancel steps, a diminutive figure amid the vaulted grandeur, her basket at her feet like a humble offering. The suspects gathered in the front pews, their faces a mosaic of apprehension. Lady Harrington's veil lifted slightly, revealing eyes rimmed with fatigue, Thorn twisting a handkerchief. Tobias slouched, avoiding gazes, Croft clutching her shawl like armor. Dear friends and foes, perhaps, Miss Marple began, her voice a gentle current flowing through the hush. Inexorable as the tide, we convene here, where death struck its blow, to lay bare the threads that wove this tragedy. Lord Harrington's end was no accident of fate, but a calculated sacrament of poison, hemlock laced in the wafer that should have symbolized grace. Lady Harrington stirred, her gloved hands clenching. Miss Marple, this is unseemly. My husband, poisoned. The doctor confirmed apoplexy. Miss Marple's eyes, pale and piercing, met hers. Apoplexy feigned by toxin, my lady. Let us unravel strand by strand. The hymn note, The silver chalice vanishes at dusk, a cipher for theft, resolved in Mr. Greaves's confession. The forgeries in baptism records, mending a feud but exposing deeper rifts. The vestry vial, hemlock's essence, tying to Mrs. Croft's brew and Miss Thorne's vendetta over the recital scandal. Your husband's false theft accusation that shackled her talents. Thorne interjected, her voice a reed trembling in wind. He deserved reckoning, but I never. Indeed, Miss Marple continued, her tone unwavering. Your alliance with Tobias and Croft, poisons switched, meant for a manor rival, the solicitor probing the will, a bungled bid for inheritance and revenge confessed in the bell tower's shadows. Your vendettas resolved in atonement's light, but the core pulse remains. Who orchestrated the wafer's taint amid sacred rites? Tobias shifted, his face ashen. Not I. We aimed for the wine at home, away from prying eyes. Croft nodded vigorously, her herbs-scented shawl slipping. My extract was for pests, not people. They twisted it. Miss Marple produced the sermon note, its edges frayed like unraveling lies. This, in Harrington's hand. Confront the veiled betrayer at dawn. He suspected, you see, estate secrets in the crypt, not mere bones but documents hidden in the Harrington vault, letters revealing a concealed affair, years of quiet endurance amid abuse. Lady Harrington rose, her veil fluttering like a captured bird. Absurd. Henry and I, our marriage was complex, but love endured. Love twisted by torment, Miss Marple countered softly. Whispers in the village, bruises concealed under sleeves, tirades behind manor walls. Your affair with the estate manager, discreet but documented in those crypt letters. Harrington's discovery, a threat to disinherit, to expose. Motive blooms, poison to silence, to claim the estate unchallenged. The nave seemed to contract, the stained glass figures, saints in judgment, leaning in as if to bear witness. Craddock stepped closer, his boots echoing. Evidence, Miss Marple. She nodded, drawing forth the hemlock leaf, the vial label, a scrap of veil fabric snagged in the garden. Herbal traces in the church garden, where you, my lady, wandered often. Under guise of devotion, but harvesting hemlock with gloved hands. The wafer, prepared by the vicar, but you assisted that morning, a helpful touch, lacing one with extract. The sermon script, your handwriting mimicking his, planted to sow doubt on others. And the crypt, I ventured there at twilight, the vault's false panel yielding letters in your script, pleas to your lover, fears of Harrington's wrath. Lady Harrington's composure shattered, her veil torn away in a gesture of defeat, revealing a face etched with years of silent suffering, lines like maps of endured storms. He was a tyrant, Miss Marple. Beatings in the night, control like iron chains, the affair, solace in despair. When he found the letters, he vowed ruin, divorce, penniless exile, the wafer, a merciful end, quick in God's house, the estate for charity, as he never would. Tobias gasped. Aunt? You? Croft's eyes widened. My grudge pales. Eviction was his cruelty, but this. Thorne whispered, justice, in a way. The widow sank to the pew, sobs racking her frame like seismic tremors. I confess. Take me. Let the parish heal. Craddock advanced, cuffs glinting in the dawn light. Lady Harrington, you're under arrest for the murder of Lord Henry Harrington. As she was led away, her steps echoing a dirge down the aisle, the nave filled with a profound hush, broken only by the coo of doves in the rafters. The suspects, Thorne, Tobias, Croft, clustered, their alliances dissolved in shared absolution. Thorne vowed to compose a requiem for the fallen. Tobias pledged to curb his vices, aiding charities with his share. Croft offered herbal remedies for the parish poor, her grudge transmuted to goodwill. Miss Marple lingered as sunlight flooded the space, illuminating dust motes like ascending souls. She reflected on faith's fragility, how sanctity could cradle sin, how forgiveness bloomed from revelation's soil. The village awakened fully, children laughing, carts rumbling, life resuming its gentle cadence. No shadows lingered in the pews, every doubt banished in dawn's embrace. As she strolled home, the bells chimed matins, a joyful peal, unburdened. St. Mary Mead slumbered no more under deception's pall. Peace descended, a fragile bloom nurtured by truth's unyielding light.